You're listening to The Fire Break with Steve Wolf. Welcome back to The Fire Break. I'm Steve Wolf. As you know, The Fire Break is sponsored by Team Wildfire, developing innovative new strategies for dealing with wildfire, whether that's knocking down big fires with jet engines, which we one day hope to do, or even just using jet engines to apply retardants over large areas of vegetation so they don't burn, right? Depriving fires of fuel. Well, depriving fires of fuel, one strategy that people use is actually just burning up the fuel so there's nothing left to burn. And that of course, when done intentionally, is called a prescribed fire. It used to be called a controlled fire, but that kind of created an assumption that it was going to remain under control, which isn't always true. Neither is it true of me, though, despite the assumptions, right? I've got a first on the show today. We have our first return guest, Annie Leverich. And it should come as no surprise that Annie, being such a great guest on our first show, because of her remarkable communication skills, holds the title of a communications manager for the Fire Network. So, for those of you who thought, what am I going to get with a communications degree? You're going to get on the Fire Break twice. And I'm not, Annie, I'm not saying this is your degree necessarily, but communication certainly is a vital skill. Welcome to the show, Annie. How are you? Welcome back.
Thanks so much, Steve. Yeah, it's great to be back. It's an honor to be your first return guest.
Yeah. I mean, you think about the history on Saturday Night Live of how many people we get back, right? So,
Yeah.
This is like that, but bigger.
Yeah.
Right.
For sure.
Okay. Maybe not a bigger audience, but a better audience, and certainly a more important cause. So Annie, I understand you just recently got back from a few weeks of training up in Nebraska, one of the more underrated states, and you were participating in some training regarding prescribed burns. So tell me a little bit about what you learned up there. Who's up there? What are they working on?
Yeah, so I was in Nebraska, let's see, a couple weeks towards the end of April. So I'm really kind of still processing a lot of the experience, and it is truly an underrated state. I have to admit that when we were gonna, when we announced that we were going to be in Nebraska for this particular training, I was unsure of what to expect. And I went to school, my undergrad degree is from Grinnell College in Iowa. So I knew that the Midwest has a lot to offer, but Iowa is very flat. And so I figured Nebraska would be more of the same. And I was so wrong. It was a very three-dimensional, beautiful place. And disclaimer, this is not to say that flat places can't be beautiful, because actually they're incredibly gorgeous, especially the sunsets and sunrises and the way the cloud formations make their own mountain formation every day, a different one. So Nebraska, where we were in particular, is in the Niobrara Valley, which is in the northern part of the state. It's the Niobrara River sort of goes along the northern border of the state, and it's a river valley. There's dimension, there's, these bluffs that sort of line the river, and these rolling hills, the sand hills. And it's just gorgeous prairie. It's divided prairie in some areas, which is increasingly rare across the Great Plains states to find that, undisturbed ecosystem of the prairie. And so we were on a nature conservancy preserve called the Niobrara Valley Preserve. And that area is incredibly rich in different plant and animal species, many of which are dependent on fire. So they do quite a bit of prescribed burning to maintain that fire regime. It's an inspiring place, really, because they have quite a efficient and sort of well-designed program for prescribed fire, and a lot of public acceptance of the fire that they do there. It doesn't hurt that it's in a pretty remote place, so there's, not as much of a constituency to get on board with prescribed fire, but at the same time, like any degree of public perception is important to try and, maintain a positive relationship. So yeah, it was a really special place to begin with, and the training in particular was a women's prescribed fire training exchange, or W-TREX, which I think I spoke on briefly in the last time we spoke, and I'm happy to share more. But yeah, that was Nebraska. It was a very special place. We saw lots of bison.
Wow,
Yeah.
interesting. So, um, so you talked about the importance of, of acceptance by the public of prescribed burns. And that's certainly something that could be addressed with, public campaigns. What do we do when we have people within the fire community who themselves are opponents of prescribed fire? Right? Because it seems like we're really getting two very distinct camps right now. There's like the people who have rebranded as good fire, right? Which is like saying clean coal, right? Except that this is actually good. And well, I guess we shouldn't say that on a show where we have Nebraska on the same topic, but
Oh.
right. But there are a lot of people within the fire community itself who aren't on board with the whole prescribed burn thing and consider it just to be an unnecessary risk that they won't participate in. So, what type of a PR campaign, for lack of a better word, or education strategy, would you recommend to pitch the virtues of prescribed fire?
Yeah, that's sort of the kind of a central question in a lot of the work that we do to try and get people sort of comfortable first and foremost, and you know aware. It's an awareness campaign around what fire can do ecologically and socially for the land and the people. And I think there's sort of different angles you can take depending on, who you're trying to make a campaign for. We talked a little bit about public and sort of surrounding residential or otherwise areas that might be near a prescribed fire. And then what you're kind of bringing up, which I think is really interesting and important, is folks within the fire service that work in similar spaces to us that might not see prescribed fire as a valuable or um, safe or, relevant thing to be focusing on in the way that we approach our wicked fire problems. And so, again, there's a couple different
Wicked
things.
fire, did you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think fire can be a bit of a wicked problem, right? It's
Oh, yeah. So is this like a juxtaposition? Blah, a juxtaposition? There we go. These new teeth are just breaking in.
oh,
Uh,
no problem.
yeah, no. So now are we kind of characterize fire as like good fire and wicked fire, like the
Oh, no.
like
Yeah.
the witches in the Wizard of Oz?
No, I think of a wicked problem as sort of like a kind of just this really tangled, difficult thing
Okay.
to address, or something that has a lot of complication and has been a problem for a long time. And so when I say problem, I say more of like, how do we create a more um, viable fire culture? And that's a topic of conversation quite a bit in my work with my colleagues, is creating this culture specifically around fire as something that has more than just negative impacts on land and people. In fact, positive. It can be positive. It can be good. And I think there is this, it's a movement as we're growing and learning more about how people react and respond to fire in good and negative ways. There is also kind of this school of thought like, well, is it really productive or helpful to think of it in a binary of good and bad, or negative and positive? And fire essentially is just fire. It just is.
It
It's
just
something
is.
that has existed for a long time, especially, we think about it more relevantly since humans have been around. But it's something that just serves a purpose in ecosystems and also in some social structures. And so it's important to not apply too much value one way or another. And of course, that gets difficult when you see people losing homes, people losing their lives. And it's a really serious problem that people have to deal with in all over the world. So in that way, it's tangled, it's thorny, and to think of fire as good for some communities feels absolutely the opposite of where they would want to go in that conversation. So I said a lot there,
You did,
but
yeah.
yeah.
So, and people have asked me, like, what is your Shakespeare degree going to do for you in the fire community? And it's just like you said, regarding fire, there's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And
Mm,
it's from Hamlet. And so,
wow.
as you said, fire just is.
Right.
And then we form attitudes about it based on our own experiences with it. But then sometimes people take their own experiences and they extrapolate out that that's the greater reality. So
Hmm.
someone who has maybe been on a fire that escaped might say, oh, there's endless examples of, prescribed burns that got away. I'm never going to do that.
Right.
And that's not a statistic. Well, first of all, nothing that happens on Earth is endless. Everything that's happened here can be counted,
Hmm.
and also we have to look at proportions, right? What percentage actually got away? And virtually none of the fires that didn't get away made it to the news.
Hmm.
And the fires that did get away and had destructive consequences did make it to the news. So therefore, we end up with this really skewed perspective. Right? There's never a story on the news about all the airplanes that didn't crash today.
That's right.
Right. So, but we only time we hear about it is when it happens, and that makes us
Mhm.
think, oh, that happens more often than it does. And I'm sure you know the name for that bias, and I probably at one time did also, but
Oh gosh, I'm
I'm
getting
not
to
going to put you on the spot there. All right. Well, I mean, I
I'm
did, but
familiar with what you're saying though, and I think it's a really good, um, of course, the negative stories or the stories that really impacted people's lives in life-changing ways, they're going to have sort of a weighted, unfairly weighted bias towards them. And I think that's human nature. I think that's the way that we, you know, approach storytelling sometimes is to come up with the extreme examples and share those more widely. But what you're saying is absolutely true that the vast majority of prescribed fires don't escape. And fire can be a really safe, fun, and unifying thing. Um, so yeah, it's a tricky issue. And that's kind of what I was referencing with this idea of a wicked problem, sort of like,
yeah,
how do we wrestle with it?
you came up with or you used an expression earlier for people who used to fight every fire and now are on board with the good fire.
Yeah, so this is actually a phrase that came up when we were in Nebraska and working with people from all sorts of different backgrounds. Some folks from agencies like the Forest Service or the National Park Service, some people with the Nature Conservancy, some people with nonprofit organizations like me. So quite a gamut of backgrounds, which was really important and valuable. And some of those folks are what they would self identify as recovering suppressionists, or
I love that.
somebody that, used to sort of be ingrained in this culture of suppress all wildfires. Fire is inherently bad. It's a pathological thing on our landscapes. And then came around slowly to understand that fire can have positive benefits ecologically, socially, culturally, etc. And there's a bit of a perspective change in some folks after realizing or being exposed to fire in positive scenarios.
Yeah, and when you think about recovering suppressionists, I think about the history of suppression and how it feels like such a colonialist thing, right? That colonizers come into communities that have been successfully managing prescribed fire, for thousands of years,
Hmm.
and all of a sudden they know better, and they obliterate that practice, which now really the knowledge of which is only retained in little pockets scattered here and abouts in the world. And now we find out, oh, there actually is something to that. And not only is there actually something to that, but it's better than what we brought.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the idea of a colonial presence is extends far beyond just fire, but it's a really good example of how different schools of thought and approaches to things were valued differently and ended up skewing the whole trajectory of how our land management would look in a couple hundred years. So I think there's a real emphasis in my work, and I think we spoke on this a little bit last time around, making sure these different schools of thought and knowledge systems are valued, acknowledged, and given space as we address how to move forward with fire.
Yeah, and I'm not going to challenge you to look this up, but uh, how how old do you think the use of the term antibiotics is?
Ooh.
Ballpark.
How the use of the term or an
Yeah,
antibiotic itself?
the term
Okay.
or the concept.
I would say like 100 years,
Yeah, not
maybe.
not far off. All
Okay.
right. And now, when do you think the first use of the term probiotics was
Oh
relative
gosh.
to that, right?
Oh my gosh, I have so many targeted ads for probiotics these days.
Right.
It's like, oh gosh, probably like, I don't know, maybe the late 90s.
Yeah, much more recent.
Yeah.
So here's these things, bacteria. They've been around forever,
Hmm.
and the first big exposure they get is about how we fight them. And then, decades later, we acknowledge, oh, there's actually something good about them.
Hmm.
And so antibiotics get much more press, long before probiotics do. And it's really very similar in America with fire,
Hmm.
right? That it was the anti-fire movement got all the traction. And it's
Right.
only recently like, oh, wait a minute, this thing that's been happening for thousands of years, yeah, there's actually some good things about it. Oh, maybe even better than a suppression strategy.
That's such an interesting comparison. Yeah. And I don't know. Yeah, it just ties into this kind of conversation around public campaigns and how influential they can be. And, we have the one of the most successful ad campaigns of Smokey the Bear, which is very much sort of put fires out and control fires. And we're starting to see a little bit more of like um, a match to that. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Burner Bob.
Burner Bob? I haven't.
Yeah, Burner Bob is a character sort of in response to Smokey Bear, and I think it started in the Southeast. And I don't want to speak too much on it without giving credit to the right people. Um, I think maybe the Longleaf Alliance was involved in developing this character, but it's a bobwhite quail, and it's kind of in response to Smokey Bear, sort of like fire can be good. There's prescribed fire. There's ways to like approach fire that are, you know, positive. And
Right.
so, you're starting to see this kind of stuff trickle up a little bit into the collective consciousness of like approaching fire in a different way and maybe seeing it as a more nuanced entity, just like bacteria. So I really
Right.
like that
Right.
comparison.
Yeah. So, really fire is just a matter of returning solids back to the gases from which they were created.
Hmm,
Right.
nice. That's some fundamentals right there.
Well, like we're not creating new pollution. We're just like, where did all the carbon from a carbon fire come from?
Hmm.
Well, it came from the air because a tree turned it into wood,
Mm-hmm.
and then it gets released. The problem is it gets released really fast,
Right.
with
Yeah.
sometimes dangerous consequences. So we've got Burner Bob now, and I guess Burner Bob says only you can support prescribed fire.
He's got some kind of little tagline like that. And yeah, I should have done a bit more research ahead of time, but yeah, folks should look him up. It's kind of a sweet response. And I think there's also something to be said for including like multiple generations in approaching this issue. We're seeing a lot more like school curriculum around fire and um, the nuance of it and the good that it can provide, and bringing in like kids and newer generations into this logic of good fire um, is a really inspiring movement to me. And Burner Bob has like coloring books, and it's really approachable to adults and kids alike, which I think is a really important way to advance this movement.
So do you think Burner Bob is going to carry some sway with like fire chiefs who have a staunch anti-prescribed burn mentality?
That's a good question. I,
Or are we going to need a more professional figure for that?
well, I think it's all sort of part of this, percolation of the movement and trying to create, a sense of that this can be approached from all different angles and approaches. And I think somebody that's in the fire service and is not interested in prescribed fire, that's going to take some time because we've seen the whole suppression, the logic of suppression, and there's been studies on this, is really sort of um, carried on by this bias towards the status quo and towards doing things the way that they've been done. And we see a really strong emphasis on the bias towards the status quo in folks that have been in the fire service and suppression for a long time. And, that's that can be in human nature. It's something that you've done for a long time. It's a certain way of doing things. It gets you a certain amount of respect and sort of advancement in your career. And to interrupt that with a different logic around fire can be really destabilizing for an entire fire system.
Sure.
So I understand, I try and approach this kind of logic with understanding and with like, there are probably certain things that I'd be really hesitant to change as well around if it was something that I did for a career for 30 plus years. So I try not to pass too much judgment, but I also can understand that there's a need for approaching things differently and finding inroads with people that are hardcore suppressionists, whether it's, inviting folks out to a prescribed fire or trying to explain more like the process and the hard work that goes into planning every single prescribed fire. It is not something that's done off the cuff. It is not a like, casual or light affair. It can be very fun, but it's not something that, people don't take seriously. And I think it's really important to emphasize that. So I said a lot there. I could say more, but I
Yeah.
don't want to ramble on too much.
No, that's a good ramble. And I wonder about the importance for the appreciation of the nuance and subtlety of well-managed prescribed burn. Uh,
Hmm.
and what we're learning from what do we call the people who've been burning for years? In the Aboriginal cultures or the Native American cultures,
Yeah.
like just because prescribed burn, is good, that doesn't mean go out and light one. Even if you manage the boundary, like different species burned at different times,
Hmm.
different maturities of the vegetation. Like there's a lot to it. We wouldn't want someone to think, oh, now prescribed burn is good. Let's just go light the woods on fire.
Right.
'Cause
Of
then you're
course.
right. Any more than you would hear like, oh, bacteria is good. Go eat every bacteria you can find.
Oh,
Like,
man.
no, you got to pick the right ones at the right time for the right purpose.
Right.
And then you get huge benefit. So
Right.
I worry that if we take that, you know, that colonialist suppressionist shift, it's like, oh, now prescribed fire is good. Boom. That we're going to
Hmm.
miss a lot of the subtleties of how to do it properly.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I think that's a fair response. And I think, if somebody were to feel that way about prescribed fire and see that as a reason not to do it, it would only take, a bit of integration into the prescribed fire world to understand how much goes into the planning and implementation and execution of a prescribed fire. And, in regards to indigenous cultural burning, which I can't speak on
there you
as,
go. Indigenous cultural burning.
yeah.
That's the phrase I needed.
Hmm. And there's different ways to approach and speak on that. And yeah, there's absolutely kind of like I was saying, like a knowledge system or a school of thought of how to approach fire, and each one has its subtleties and its variations. And what I can speak on is in Nebraska, what I found to be really interesting is how difficult it was to actually have a burn window, a window of time when it's actually safe to conduct your prescribed burn because of all the different weather factors that are very subtle and precise that go into creating a safe burn window. So whether it's your relative humidity or the wind speeds, the temperature, the likelihood that your fuels are going to ignite or not, the moisture in those fuels, your lightning activity, the cloud cover, the likelihood that your smoke is going to rise and dissipate, or if it's going to stay somewhat more stagnant on the landscape. Those are all factors that are really subtly, that can change so quickly in,
Yes.
a matter of minutes. And so it's really people, in Nebraska where I was, they were tracking the weather constantly. And it was a really interesting sort of view into how subtle and how precise that window can be. And if something was out of prescription for that burn, we would not burn. If something was even just a little bit out, it's very important to be in that kind of sweet spot.
So I'll ask a question neither of us can probably answer, but just, food for thought. A lot of the fire prediction modeling right now is based on, how can we know what a destructive fire is going to do? Where's it likely to start? Once it starts, where's it likely to spread? What are the threatened assets, etc.?
Mm-hmm.
Do these models apply, or do we need new models that could address optimal strategies for good fire? That right,
Yeah.
right. You said there were all these subtle, weather conditions, ground conditions, smoke inversions, etc. Are we modeling out, to your knowledge, the best practices and parameters for prescribed burn?
So, yeah, I couldn't answer that question with like a firm yes, but I would say it's extremely likely that there's a certain degree of consideration for how those modeling systems could support prescribed fire. Um, yeah, it's certainly not my wheelhouse, but I know
Yeah.
that like technology and fire are starting to braid much more, and there is most certainly some effort being made to address how prescribed fires could be better predicted in terms of their behavior. But I do want to like put like a pin in that in terms of like I do feel like there's a lot of human intuition and the subtleties that you can get from just sensing the weather yourself that are really, really valuable and really powerful to see happen. There were some folks at this event in Nebraska that know the area really well, that know the weather patterns, that know the fuels, that know the animals, and their sensibility for that place is really powerful to see. So there's certainly, aspects of technology that could support these efforts, and it's also super important to invest in getting people the exposure and the experience in the prescribed fires to maintain that sensibility.
I'm wondering if we're going to see some type of a, shift or transition, the way we might see with uh, in medicine, right? That we have this sense that there's traditional medicine, and then everything else is alternative medicine. And right now, most of the wisdom of prescribed fire would be in that realm of alternative medicine. How can we take that and you know package that so that the science aspect of it is captured, appreciated, and replicated to other areas where they don't feel that it's. And I'm going to use the other use of the word wooey, like with multiple O's,
Mhm.
and not and no you, right? That it's not. Yeah, yeah. I hope you know what I'm trying to say here, because I don't know if I'm saying it well, but
So,
that it's not, that how to do a good prescribed fire doesn't have to be a shamanistic thing, like everything that these indigenous cultural burn experts know, can be documented in science and then presented that way for people who have an appetite to see things presented more that way.
Well, actually, I don't know. I think I'd push back on that a little bit because I think
Please.
there's a lot of sort of sensibility in indigenous cultures that is actually never shared outside of those communities. And, for whatever reason, it's, kind of their right and you know, it's part of their self-determination to maintain their own cultural practices without needing to share it with, outside practitioners. So
Hmm.
I think there's, um,
You mean it's job security?
oh, no, I wouldn't
If
put
we
it
don't
that
tell
way.
anyone how to do this thing that everyone needs to know how to do, they'll need us in order to be able to do it.
No, I think it's their right to maintain their own cultural practices. And I think there's already been such an incredible sharing of knowledge and understanding of land as it relates to fire that, prescribed fire already is its own science. There's
True.
and limitless papers out there around prescribed fire and the value it has ecologically, scientifically for the community. And so in many ways, we know already what we need to know about prescribed fire. And I think it's more about like we've been talking about, kind of maintaining that, um, these public education campaigns around fire and making people feel more comfortable with it on their landscapes and maybe even embrace it as part of the history and future of their landscapes. And also, investing in the people that are doing prescribed fire to cultivate their, like I was saying earlier, their sensibility. And that can be unique to every individual, but I think there are certain, factors around fire that feel sort of innate in a human spirit. And that's not, we would never want to extract that from an indigenous community. That is, their sort of their approaches are their own, and the knowledge share and the transfer that we can have between indigenous and non-indigenous practitioners is super special, but there's no need for like for the extraction, I guess.
I mean, in medicine, I know many of our medicines came from, indigenous cultures around the world, right? The the Yumba Indians in the Amazon area have been using this particular plant to treat this particular ailment for hundreds of years. Well, we wouldn't say, well, okay, only they are allowed to use that plant and to have this knowledge. Like we go in and we figure out, okay, what's the active ingredient in that plant? How can then we replicate that? How can we make that benefit available to people who need that around the world, but don't necessarily want to seek, uh, an Amazon tribe shaman because they need that medicine.
Yeah, I guess I don't know if it directly applies. I think there's sort of this, and we can get into like a bigger conversation around like indigenous culture and how that's been extracted and sort of this knowledge, or even, like a plant in the Amazon that we discover has this value for human health could then be, farmed into the ground and sort of ruined in terms of like its potency
Yeah,
and its actual cultural value. And so there's like this commodification of indigenous knowledge that I think is a really slippery and dangerous,
no
slope, and
doubt.
actually perpetuates colonialism. So I think that's where it's important to kind of be careful around what kind of knowledge we expect from others, and
That's true.
the degree to which, that overlap can come from a partnership and a collaboration, or like actually extracting the knowledge and taking it away from someone. So um so yeah.
Can you take away knowledge from someone, or can you just replicate it elsewhere?
Well, I think again, it depends on like how you use that. I mean, knowledge is power, right? That's sort of our core tenet. And so there's a way to wield that knowledge in a way that actually does not do justice or service to where it originated from. And I think we see that all too often in the way that,
Sure.
indigenous knowledge is used. So I think it's just something that at
Yeah,
least
and products, right? Like,
and products too. Yeah.
right. Right. Once the people who lived on quinoa for thousands of years had their product discovered elsewhere, now they can't afford quinoa anymore. Right? Once people that lived in beautiful tropical areas that enjoyed coconut water, and the secret got out, now the whole place is taken over by coconut trees and the people can't
Exactly.
afford to, right? So yeah, there's definitely consequences to people who hold this knowledge, and I could see why, if you know something that Western culture wants, uh, you have to think twice about what the consequences
Yes,
to you are going to be if you pass that up, if you hand that over.
exactly. And you know, I'm a white person. I come from, a history of people that probably did a lot of knowledge extraction. And so, I'm not one to, stand on I'm not better than anybody talking about this, but I do just want to like reduce any harm further in like how
Yeah.
I approach this work and how I, make space and make room for making things better. I don't know. It's,
Yeah. No.
yeah.
I just I would imagine that uncontrolled wildfire anywhere in the world hurts people everywhere in the world. Including people who are in indigenous cultures, and so that it would benefit anyone to have other people know how to keep their fires in check.
Yeah, I mean, any sort of, well, the movement of it for environmental justice in general is sort of acknowledging how much climate change and destructive wildfires and other, you know, weather events, etc., really disproportionately impact communities that have had experience with knowledge extraction and colonialism and disadvantages. So it definitely is a big sort of spherical problem. we, we
Spherical problem.
yeah, we're kind of coming back to these same sort of issues that, you know, we need some kind of intervention or some kind of like, I think what part of my work is really trying to find these threads where we come together and
Yeah.
can work alongside each other and make things better for everyone. And like you're saying, like without moving too fast, because sometimes I think there can be this feeling like prescribed fire is some kind of panacea. Like it's we just, we do a bunch of prescribed fire and all the fuels will be reduced. And ultimately, like that isn't really a reality. It's not,
Right.
we don't have the workforce for it. It's not actually safe. Not all landscapes need prescribed fire. There's other aspects of, land management that are just as effective in reducing fire, the likelihood of a destructive fire there. So anyway, it's we can't move too fast.
Right. And on the other hand, we can't move too slow. We got to find just the right speed, right? Are
Exactly.
you are you familiar with a concept called the maniac moron phenomena?
I'm not, but I'm intrigued.
Okay, so the maniac moron phenomena is the psychological sensation that we have that we do things at just the right speed, and
Mm,
it comes from driving. You're driving down the road, and Annie, you are driving at the perfect speed for those conditions, and
mhm.
therefore anyone who whizzes past you going way faster is a maniac, and anyone who you get behind who's not driving the speed that they should be driving is a moron. And right,
Sure.
right. So that's the maniac moron phenomena.
Oh my gosh, that's
Right.
great. I
But
feel like
but
you have so many of these like references that really are like poetically applied to fire.
right. But there is that sense, right? That people who are in the suppressionist camp,
Hmm.
think, oh, these people who are going out starting all these wildfires, they're maniacs. They're going to light the world on fire.
Yeah.
And right, and people who are doing it successfully think, oh my God, these morons, when are they going to catch on to the fact that we
Mhm.
need controlled burns or prescribed
Right.
fire? We need good fire on the ground. uh, and so I think one of your challenges that I'm not going to take on, but I'll leave it for you, is to figure out, you know how do these communities message each other? How do these
Mm,
disparate camps communicate with each other in a way where they can come up with acceptable data-driven solutions,
mhm.
that for the communities that they have stewardship over.
Yes. Well, I will do
So
my best.
how's that going, Annie?
Yeah, no, I do think that's a really interesting approach to it because, well, it also relates to this idea of the status quo bias that I indicated earlier around like, well, the way I'm doing it must be the way it should be done because it's how I'm doing it and it's how it has been done. So, yeah, there again, there's like some kind of like intervention or need for, alternative experiences, alternative positive experiences in different camps, to create that, association that what the other party is doing is good. And I also want to acknowledge that, it isn't like suppressionism or suppression and prescribed fire, one or the other.
Right.
Like it's very much a shared world of fire. And there are so many people that do both, that understand both, that are working to kind of create inroads between both because it's not an opposite, right? It's not like
Right.
one or the other. And there are so many ways that suppression actually uses prescribed fire with backburning and etc. And so
Yes.
that intimate knowledge of how fire works and operates is a shared knowledge. And sorry, my cat is standing on my
Hi, cat.
desk.
Don't you put
um,
your cat on camera? We'd like to see.
so anyway, or not she, that's my cat. Anyway, there are lots of overlap, and I think one thing that is really important is acknowledging like how much there's cat hair flying everywhere. Um, it's just making sure we make room for everyone in this fire family because I do feel like it is something that requires more togetherness than separation.
Well, I see you're subject to an aerial fur attack right there. So prescribed grooming is another thing.
Yeah,
You could
I
bring that
shouldn't
up
have
in
worn a
the
black shirt today.
No,
Uh,
it just looks like it's floating. That's all
yeah.
right. You're not allergic to it, other than. Yeah. So the other thing that we're seeing more of is opportunistic prescribed burns. Well, we didn't plan to start a burn here. We didn't do the research, but a fire started, and
Hmm.
we quickly researched. It's like, well, the fire started there, and it's not really threatening anyone. So why don't we just let that go for a while, and we'll just monitor it and watch the perimeter and make
Hmm.
sure it doesn't get anything that near something we don't want to burn.
Yeah.
Um, and it seems like it's easier to get people on board
Yeah.
to manage a fire in a prescribed way than
Yeah.
it is to ignite a fire.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean,
I
that
mean,
kind of gets
there's
into,
some of those burning this week, and it's
hmm.
okay. Was it started as a lightning strike? And then they
Right.
said, all right, let's let it go to 1,200
Hmm.
acres. Now let it go to 4,000. Let's go to 10,000.
Right.
Right. And so take advantage of that where they never could have gotten support to start that fire in the first place.
Hmm. Yeah. That is a whole nother, aspect of this.
See,
I shouldn't have called it a wicked problem. Maybe I should just call it like a
yeah,
wicked scenario or a
what if
situation.
it had just said, oh, you know what, I have friends from Boston, and they
Yeah.
use that
That's probably where I heard
something,
it.
meaning that it's just really cool.
Yeah. It
It's
sounds
cool
cool.
problem. Yeah.
Um,
It's a wicked awesome problem.
yeah. Yeah, no, I think yeah, this idea of managed wildfire is really interesting. And I can't really speak to it too much since I'm not really in the science of it, but what I can say is that it's something that seems to be coming up a lot more in conversations and
Yeah.
it's gaining a little bit more comfortability within the suppression world. And I manage this weekly blog through my work called the Fire Networks blog, and we made a series of blogs around managed wildfire for folks to share their stories of how, folks from agencies or what have you that have experienced managed wildfire and have stories to tell about it. Whether it worked well or whether it wasn't exactly ideal. And so it's a really interesting conversation that's developing and seems to be, moving in the right direction. Again, like it is
Mhm.
important to acknowledge like some of these wildfires are really severe. So even if they're moved through a landscape, it isn't necessarily the right kind of fire for that landscape.
Yeah.
But I do feel strongly like that's something that's put into consideration when these decisions are being made, to manage the wildfire in a certain way.
Yeah. And I'll push back that you're not a wildfire scientist because
Oh.
uh, because an important aspect of the data side of it is very much impacted by the reputational side of it,
Mm.
or the beliefs that people bring to it.
Hmm.
And to the degree that you impact the way people think about it, you're impacting the way it's practiced.
Yeah, well, thanks for that tip of the hat. I appreciate that. Yeah, I do feel more and more like there is a important place for communicators in this world. It can sometimes feel like you're kind of the one behind the curtain, sort of creating these movement
Yeah,
shifts.
right.
Um, but it is absolutely part of the overall picture of how we're conceptualizing fire and therefore behaving around fire.
Yeah. And I would say it's very much the way, virology and immunization science is, right?
Hmm.
Y- y- I don't know anything about virology or how a virus replicates itself within an enzyme. That's like for the realm of scientists. But it doesn't matter how great that science is. If people's beliefs are anti-vaccination and they won't use it.
Mm.
So the degree to which the science can be beneficial to society is completely proportional to their belief in how good that product, science, service is.
Right. Yeah, that's
If
a
they
good.
don't use it, why develop it in the first place?
Hmm.
And the same thing with right, with prescribed fire. Like you could have all the science in the world about how necessary it is, but if you don't impact people's attitudes about it, you're never going to get to see the benefits.
Hmm. Yeah, that's the problem I'm working with in my work, and
That's the problem you're
luckily,
solving.
oh, and I can't keep calling it a problem. The
The challenge. I don't know.
challenge, yeah, the sort
Yeah.
of like something that we're all looking at together as a society is with different approaches is
Well, we're
how do we
not
live better
really.
with this?
We're not all looking at it because it's not all on everyone's radar.
Hmm.
But part of your work is getting it on people's radar
Hmm.
because it impacts them and they didn't realize it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, all over the country and beyond, there's people every day that are impacted in one way or another. So just getting them the information when they need it and how they need it is, yeah, it's a tricky one, but really it does feel important. And I know there's so many role models that I have in this work that have made a lot of headway.
Okay, let's end with that then,
Hmm.
because I want to know who your role models are.
Oh my gosh. Well,
It doesn't have to be a short list.
there's so many role models. I mean, I feel strongly that everyone in fire has something to share and something to offer. And in that way, like everyone that I've interacted with has been some kind of role model. And I know that's a bit of a cop-out answer.
Right? They could be a positive role model, negative role model, whatever. But just, and you can make this more fair by saying in no particular order,
Yes, in
like
no particular
like they
order.
do on
Well,
The Bachelor or whatever.
I mean, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge my direct supervisor and boss, not because she's my boss, but just because she's absolutely incredible. Um, Her name's Michelle Medley Daniel, and she is the deputy director of the organization I work for, the Watershed Research and Training Center. And her capacity and ability to hold so many different perspectives and approaches and understandings of fire and then share that information with different audiences has been an incredible inspiration for me. And I just really appreciate her leadership style and the way that she approaches everybody where they're at. So I've learned a lot from Michelle. And another person that I really value quite a lot and have learned a lot from is Lania Quinn Davidson, who is the program director of the W-TREX program, which is where I was in Nebraska. Oh, I just saw another piece of cat hair fly by. Um, Sorry about that. But Lania is similarly an excellent communicator and really has done so much in California, but also beyond to influence public knowledge and public perception of prescribed fire. She's also been extremely um, involved in legislation and getting better sort of liability considerations for prescribed fire in California. So she's a rock star and total role model. The first person that inspired me to get into fire was a person named Sasha Berleman. And Sasha runs a program out of Sonoma County, or sort of North Bay counties, called Fire Forward, and that's through the Audubon Canyon Ranch. And so just seeing Sasha work in fire, and she has a PhD, and she started this program to get more people involved, and sort of from anybody could come. It wasn't just for fire professionals. That's how I was able to get in, was I was able to volunteer with this program, and to see her build this accessible program was really inspiring to me, and still to this day is something that I aspire to, is just making things more accessible to people. So those are three of the heavy hitters. I could name so many more.
Well, you'll do that on your third appearance,
Oh my gosh.
which will
Well,
schedule a
yeah.
month out.
Yeah.
Because the work that you're doing, like it's really dynamic,
Thanks.
right? And it changes very quickly. And as new science emerges, as new communications practices emerge, you're on top of them. So
Thanks. Well, it definitely is a, real, it's very valuable to me to be able to come on to this podcast and talk about it a bit, because, when you're in it, it's hard to see sort of how it all fits together. But I really appreciate this conversation and your analogies and sort of different ways of thinking about fire that don't have to do with fire necessarily, but are easily applied. So this is definitely valuable for me as well, to just speak with you and kind of comment on this universe of things that we're all trying to figure out.
I think I could best say that by thank you for tolerating me.
Oh, yeah. No, it's a good conversation. Yeah, I feel like we covered some good ground.
Wonderful. Annie Leverich. Amazing work that you're doing there. And are there things people could do before we leave that could help you support your work?
Oh.
Thematically, academically, obviously financially always, but what are missing pieces on the way to you achieving some of the things that you're looking to get done?
Well, thank you for asking that. Yeah, I feel like what I focus on so much in my work is just engagement with my audiences. And so I'd really encourage folks to check out some of the stuff that we put out as the Fire Networks and read them and let me know what you think. Again, I mentioned that we have a weekly blog that highlights different stories around fire, whether it's prescribed fire, wildfire, or community adaptation to fire. We really run the gamut. My cat is running around again. I'm so sorry. She's
engaging with the content. I think that's great.
Yeah. She's excited about it too, which is, great. Anyway, we have this weekly blog called the Fire Networks blog, and you can find that if you go to firenetworks.org. So I would really encourage folks to check that out and read some of our stories. I'm always looking for new voices and authors for our blog if folks have certain perspectives that they'd like to share for our audience. And yeah, that's the biggest thing, is just because I'm all about storytelling, and that's kind of just how the little incremental movements build, is through storytelling. So check out that blog.
And I'll put a link to that on all of our material. And I hope that you're posting links to your blog on LinkedIn regularly and other places where people will watch. And I don't mean this in a self-serving way, but if you go to youtube.com/Team Wildfire and you get a list of all of the guests that have been here, like those would be great people for you to reach out to.
Love that.
To author pieces for your blog.
Yes,
and I know they would. And if they push back at all, you let me know and I'll call them directly and chew them out.
Oh, you don't have
I
to.
mean,
I wouldn't be
encourage them. I
surprised.
mean, encourage them to 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 write something for your piece, for
Oh,
your
thank
blog.
you. Yeah,
Yeah.
honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if there's already some overlap. I bet
Oh,
there's,
I'm sure there are.
figures
Yes.
that we have both found to be inspiring. So,
Yeah. Well, it's not a huge community, so
mhm.
people like yourself really stand out,
Well, thank you.
in it. So keep up the great work, and I will see you in a month at our third our
Sounds
third
good.
monthly.
I'll come up
Uh,
with some new topics to cover.
I'm sure you come across dozens of them every day, so you figure out
Yes.
which ones you think are best for us. Andy Leverich, again, thank you, communications manager with the Fire Network. Check them out at firenetwork
Firenetworks.org.
dot networks, because networks is plural, right?
Mm-hmm.
Firenetworks.org. Great.
Exactly.
Annie, thanks so much for joining me. And
Thank
thank you
you.
all for listening, watching, and participating with this conversation with myself, with Annie and her cat. Very interesting. And the sounds of Oakland if you're listening on really sensitive headphones. You've
Mm-hmm.
been watching and listening to The Fire Break. I'm Steve Wolf. We're sponsored by Team Wildfire. Thanks so much, and we'll see you at the next one. Take care.